Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Mean Streets. Chris Meaney here with you at Chris Meaney of FTN Fantasy. Going to get into my wide receiver rankings, talk tiers, talk targets, fades, some busts, and some deep league wide receivers that I have some shares of as well. Tight ends to follow, and then a little bit later on in the week, we'll have a future show. So I wanted to share some of the futures that I'm in on, player futures, division futures. We'll talk predictions, maybe some bowl predictions as well. And then we'll get back into the live shows starting week one. We're just about a week away from week one. Ravens and Chiefs getting it on. So, well, things that you can look forward to, like waiver wire stuff, some picks and some props on Monday. Of course, waivers again on Tuesday, getting you set up. On Wednesday, rankings will be out live over at FTN Fantasy, trying to get those out Tuesday afternoon at FTN Fantasy. If you have the package, then you'll have weekly rankings from all of us and projections and all that good stuff. Thursdays will be teeing up the Thursday night football game. Friday, taking some of your starter sit questions, as well as some picks and some props and stuff against the spread, Survivor, and all that stuff. Things that, if you've been hanging out with me over the past couple of years, you are well aware of what we'll be covering here on Mean Streets and multi-sport show. We'll get into the hockey and the basketball and the postseason and Major League Baseball as we creep closer into October. But you're here for the football rankings, so let's get after it. What I will say is FTN15 still running that promo code over at ftnfantasy.com/pricing. 16 different cheat sheets, rankings, man, tools galore, stats hub. You get the DVOA statistics, but rankings for whatever format you play. The projections are there, the Discord channel, all the content, and we'll be with you throughout the entire season. Hit me up if you have any questions. meanstreetsftn@gmail.com, or reach out at Chris Mean, or leave a comment here in the YouTube comment section. And I will answer any questions that you guys do have. Keep your league stuff. We still got a little over a week until week one. So I am a heavy wide receiver drafter. I like drafting them early and often. It's funny now how the fantasy landscape has changed a bit. I went back and I looked at the ADP 10 years ago, and I know 10 years is a long time ago. But if you remember, Peyton Manning and Drew Brees were drafted inside the top 12. It was heavy running backs, and now it's heavy wide receivers, especially in best ball. There is something to be said about going the other way. Like if your league just drafts all wide receivers in the first round, just soaking up some of that value at the running back position, going the other way, zigging versus zagging. But I have a hard time doing that. That said, easier said than done. I like wide receivers. I like to, like I said, draft them early and often. I think about a couple of years ago, getting Tyreek and Justin Jefferson with my first two picks. Last year, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Adams. I know Adams didn't really return value, but I like getting wide receivers early and often, and I'm sure you're aware of that if you watch the running back ranking videos. So here's the top 12 over at ftnfantasy.com. I don't have an issue with any of these guys. Tyreek Hill at number 1. CeeDee Lamb is under contract now. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I do have at 3. I moved him up. I'm not concerned about Jamar Chase. We had Jay Morrison, who covers the Bengals from Pro Football Network, join the SiriusXM show. You can catch me, Jake Sealing, Dean Martinez, Monday to Friday at 1 to 3 Eastern over at SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, channel 87. We had him on, and he didn't have any concerns about Chase. He said he wasn't talking. Then he returned to practice over the weekend. So, I mean, these guys are all like Hill and CeeDee are in a tier by themselves. Amon-Ra, Chase, Jefferson, AJ, and Garrett Wilson are all in the second tier. And I wouldn't fight you if you wanted to say Brown, Chase, and Jefferson on their own tier, and then a little bit of a drop off in terms of AJ and Garrett Wilson. I think AJ and Garrett Wilson are probably closer to Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Mike Evans than they are maybe Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Tyreek's been my number ones all along. I'm more willing to take CeeDee now. Like I still would have anyways, at pick number 2 or 3 or whatever it may be. CeeDee Lamb led the league in targets and catches. He had a healthy 34% target share from week 8 on. There was no question of him getting the bag. They finally gave him the bag, and he got paid. All right, he's just a target machine. Tyreek Hill, cheetah code, led all wideouts and yards last season, back-to-back 1,700-yard seasons, first player in NFL history to do so, and he did it back-to-back years with Tua in his first 2 years in Miami. Jamar Chase, he and Burrow both missed time last season, and Chase still finished as a wide receiver one and Tyler Boyd gone and Mixon gone, I mean, he really should get all the volume that he can handle. He's got 2 years left on his deal, so that's why I'm not really concerned. I think he's going to be there come week one. The question, you got Amon-Ra here, Sun God. He touched career highs in targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns. And, I've seen him fall to pick 8. I'd say consider yourself lucky if that's the case. And I've seen him go as wide receiver 3. And I do have him here just with Chase. And, he isn't under contract. I would put Chase back up to 3. But I could go either way on those guys, right? I think certainly a PPR boost with Amon-Ra. Chase, we have seen the ceiling of like the 17 plus fantasy points per game. There's been some injuries over the past couple of years have slowed him down. Joe Burrow gets hurt a lot. It's a very, very tough division. So like Amon-Ra, I think is a touch safer. Goff, 14 games inside a dome. And again, the PPR boost there. Justin Jefferson at 5, I'll admit, because of the quarterback play. I do believe he is quarterback proof. I mean, you can ask Nick Mullins. He had, 2 games. I think like Mullins had like 3 or 4 games down the stretch, but there were 2 games in particular. I think both actually came against the Lions where he really popped off, and he was a target machine there. TJ Hawkinson's on the pup list to start the season, most likely out 4 to 6 weeks, definitely 4. Addison. So it's a downgrade at the quarterback position. KJ Osborne left the squad. I got Aaron Jones in the backfield there now. All right, Sam Darnold, I think, is more capable of, feeding Justin Jefferson and having him be, a high-end wide receiver 1. I think he's that good. I think the play calling with Kevin O'Connell just helps. Like, he's one of the better play callers in the NFL. So I'm not super concerned with Justin Jefferson. And then if you had any worries about, Sam Darnold and then making the quarterback switch to JJ McCarthy, at least you just know it's going to be Sam Darnold. Unless you start seeing ghosts again and turning the football over, then we will see Nick Mullins. And we just know, hey, listen, Nick Mullins had no issues force feeding the ball to Justin Jefferson. So I think he's going to be fine. I see him fall down after AJ and Garrett Wilson and just pick him. You know what I mean? Like, just take the value if people are going to let him fall to 8, 9, 10, or Chase 8, 9, 10. Like, just take those guys because the ceiling is extremely high. Into the next tier here, AJ Brown. I mean, 31% of his target share, ranked 2nd in the NFL last season. He's 5th overall in targets. He's 3rd in yards. The ceiling is sky high. Philly's new offense with Kellen Moore running guys in motion. They grabbed Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson, he's not going to cut into what AJ does. I think the guy that gets hurts the most would probably Dallas Goedert, but I don't really expect a whole lot from Jahan Dotson. He's an upgrade of what they had with like Paris Campbell and the rookies, and they just haven't had a solid 3 for a couple of years. And when AJ went down, Julio Jones was getting targets in a must-win scenario, and of course everything's must-win into the playoffs. But that's what they were dealing with, and Jahan Dotson gives them some depth there. So no issues with AJ. I think running guys in motion is good. It's beneficial for AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts, and also Saquon catching balls out of the backfield. And Garrett Wilson in here, the volume has been there, but the ceiling, we've yet to see it. It's high. Should Rodgers play 17 games this time around? Questions about how good Rodgers is, right? You haven't seen him play football in a couple of years. He wasn't great in his last year in Green Bay. That was his first year without Devontae Adams. But Garrett Wilson, even if Rodgers is just, even if he plays 17 games, it's going to be a big time bonus for Garrett Wilson. What does he need to do to get up into that upper tier? And even in this tier, I mean, Seeley doesn't have him as a top 10 wide receiver. He says he needs roughly 4 more fantasy points per game. Like, living in the 7, 8, 9 touchdown range would get Garrett Wilson in this range. You just have to, you are banking on Aaron Rodgers being healthy, because we've seen what it looks like without capable quarterback play, and it's not great, right? I had this guy last year in fantasy. I think I started AJ and Garrett Wilson in a lot of leagues towards the end of round 1, or Devontae Adams, and Wilson and Adams didn't return value, but upgrades at the quarterback position for both of those guys. We have a statistic called prayer yards over at ftnfantasy.com. It's in the stats hub. It's what you think. It's uncatchable air yards. Olave was up at the top. There's no upgrade at the quarterback position with Chris Olave. Derek Carr had a nice finish towards the end of last season. But Clint Kubiak is a great play caller, comes from San Fran, using guys in motion. I think could help, certainly, Derek Carr and Chris Olave, maybe Rashid Shaheed. But guys on that list like Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson were up at the top. And I just talked about the upgrade at quarterback with Rodgers, should he stay healthy, but also in Las Vegas, right? You remember this time last year, they started with Jimmy G. I'm sure you guys watched the receiver doc on Netflix. How ticked off was Adams, right? I mean, Jimmy G was just not a capable quarterback. And that's why I was really just kind of down in general on like Jacobs and the Raiders because I just didn't believe in Jimmy G. And that's why I was down on the Niners the previous year. And it didn't take long for, Brock Purdy to take over there. I think it's a good thing that Gardner Minshew is under center. Aiden O'Connell, there was a game where he didn't even complete a pass after the first quarter. I think Gardner Minshew, he peppered Michael Pittman last year. He did some good things when Jalen Hurts went down. Devontae Smith and AJ Brown didn't really miss a beat, and he did some good things when he was a starter there in Jacksonville. So Adams is a target hog. He's going to be among the leaders in targets like he was last year, and I think those targets will be a little bit more catchable. And people have him. He's going as wide receiver 17, 18 in drafts. I still view him as a wide receiver 1. Puka Nacua with the knee injury, I did bump him down a couple. He returned to practice this week. Same tier again with Adams. So, either or. I think if there's a guy inside the top 12 here that could bust, like Puka is maybe one of those guys, or maybe Chris Olave because the touchdowns they haven't been there for him. They're more willing to run with Taysom Hill, 20 plus red zone rushing attempts last year. And then Alvin Kamara, in the red zone, as opposed to throwing to Chris Olave. Juwan Johnson, probably more of a red zone target for Carr than Chris Olave. That's the one knock I have. He doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. But Puka, hey, I'm not here to pat myself on the back, but we told you guys, right? Tweeted it. It was the most exposure I had at the wide receiver position in best ball. We did a lot of the best ball drafts here on YouTube. I believe in Puka. But I do believe that there's like one guy here that maybe wouldn't return value. It's Puka, and that would just mean Cooper Kupp would have to stay healthy. But I view these guys as like 1A, 1B. I like Puka. I like Cooper Kupp as well. Yeah, man, both of those guys are studs. Stafford, as long as he stays healthy, is going to chuck it, and McVay is a great play caller. So it's a lot of people's keeper this year. You picked him up off waiver wire, you draft him late, you can keep him at a good cost, you keep him, you roll with him. But if there's one guy here in the top 12, it's kind of like Olave and Nacua. Marvin Harrison is that good. He is going high in drafts. We haven't seen a whole lot of him, but he has all the traits to be elite right off the hop. He's going to see a lot of balls from Kyler Murray. I think he's going to be a better wide receiver than DeAndre Hopkins. And Hopkins balled out with Kyler. I mean, not this year. He's a rookie after all. He's got big shoes to fill, right? Daddy was fantastic in the NFL. He's got the bloodlines, the pedigree. He's got everything, man. He's got speed. He can go up and get it. He's got route running ability. And at the same time, like Zay Jones suspended, Michael Wilson, I kind of feel like could be okay. A lot of people like Greg Dortch. These guys are not going to be, I don't think either of them are going to be fantasy relevant. The offense is going to run through Kyler running the ball and James Conner, who I think is a value. We talked about him in the running back video. They're going to lean on Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. And Trey McBride got a lot of run towards the end of last season. I don't believe the volume will be the same, just knowing that Marv is there and that, you do have a healthy Michael Wilson who missed a little bit of time last year in his rookie campaign. But I think he's going to feed Marv just like he fed Hopkins, and that was double-digit targets per game. So I do believe he deserves to be in that range. I like to have a pick kind of like top 9, which kind of lets me get AJ as CMC and Brees and Bijan are going off the board. But if you're picking outside of, top 9, if you're like 10, 11, and 12, you could come away with a Garrett Wilson, a Puka, any kind of combination of Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Puka, Marv, or Mike Evans. Or if you wanted to go hero RB, go Saquon and Taylor and get one of those wide receivers. I wouldn't fight you on that. But a majority of my drafts, I'm going wide receiver. And I like to start wide receiver in some drafts. Then get involved with a Kamara in the 4th, or a Connor in the 5th, a Zamir White in the 7th, a Raheem Mostert in the 6th or the 7th, kind of punting my RB2 and having a hero RB there. Pacheco I've seen, or Jacobs falling to the 4th, Pacheco in the 3rd, getting one of those guys as my hero and having 2 or 3 of these running backs or 2 of these wide receivers, I think is ideal. Mike Evans, right? I mean, you had any questions about him last year with Baker Mayfield, they were answered. He's had 1,000 yards every single year. It's actually better last year with Baker than he was with Aaron Rodgers or with Tom Brady. In year number 2 with Tom, when they won the Super Bowl, he was great. But year 2 with Tom wasn't as good as year 1 with Baker. New regime. We got Dave Canales gone, but Liam Cohen, right, was the OC for the Rams when Baker went there and kind of rejuvenated his career towards the end of that season when everyone was hurt, right? Stafford and Cooper Kupp, I believe that was the year after they won the Super Bowl there. So some familiarity there in terms of the play calling, and maybe Evans grows in year 2 with Baker. Baker improves, right? These guys year 2 together. Chris Godwin, I think, is a good target as well. Marvin Harrison, Chris Olave there. So I want I want two of these guys if I can. Of course, you probably only can if you're in the back end. Or I've seen Evans fall, Chris Olave in the middle rounds. But for the most part, all of those guys are going in the first 15 to 17 picks. Definitely in best ball formats. You're hanging out with us live at number 12 is, or on our YouTube page, number 12 is Chris Olave there. Okay, getting into the next set of wide receivers. Drake London at 13, Deebo Samuel 14, Cooper Kupp 15, Nico Collins at 16, DJ Moore at 17, DK Metcalf at 18, Jalen Waddle at 19, Devontae Smith at 20. I'm high on T. Higgins, a lot higher than most. Wide receiver 21. I've had to move Brendan Ayuk down at 22, get into him in a minute. Malik Neighbors at 23, Michael Pittman at 24. So compared to consensus and ADP, I may be a little bit higher on T, a little bit lower on Pittman. Neighbors I'd like. I think he's extremely talented. He should get a ton of targets. I could see him being inside the top 10, but it's like Garrett Wilson, right? What do the targets look like? How many touchdowns can he score in that Giants offense? The offensive line should be improved, but the answer is not. The quarterback play in New York, right? Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. I was stumping on who that second guy was, Drew Lock. The answer is not there. And I think it could be a lot like Garrett Wilson, where Garrett Wilson's inside the top 5 in targets, but he finishes as like wide receiver 20, 23, 24 as a low end too, because those targets are just uncatchable and the touchdowns are low, right? Garrett Wilson, like I said, needs to get to the 7, 8, 9 touchdown range, really does, to get into the high end wide receiver 1 tier. I think Neighbors is, again, fantastic. There's not a route he can't run. LSU machine. The guy is a beauty. And I think from a talent standpoint, he's on that first tier with Marvin Harrison and Roma Dunze. But listen, I mean, Marv is in a situation. If the Arizona Cardinals drafted Malik Neighbors instead of Marv, Malik Neighbors would be a top 12 wide receiver for me. It's that simple. Better quarterback play, clearly the go-to guy there. So I'm a little bit down on Neighbors. Drake London, I see the talent. I have moved him around a bit, but it's been like 13, 15, 16. It's still in this tier. Having Kirk Cousins there is good for his game, right? Kirk Cousins is one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. Yes, he is a little bit older now, 36, 37, coming off the ruptured Achilles, and it is his planted foot, right? So unlike Rodgers, it's that right one. I think maybe a little bit more important, but accurate quarterback, right? And you could see, and I don't want to compare him to Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp, but the offense should run the same, right? It's from the Sean McVay tree. Kevin O'Connell comes from that offense. Zach Robinson coming from that offense. And you see how they featured Cooper Kupp over the past couple of years. You see how they featured Justin Jefferson. So Drake London should be featured the same. I like Meaney, but it's pretty thin after Meaney. And I like Kyle Pitts. One thing I will say is Kyle Pitts is certainly the value. I believe in Pitts, and we'll get to tight ends just another day, but I believe that the target share will be pretty close with these guys, almost like a 1A, 1B, but London's ceiling is certainly higher. So I do have him as a high-end wide receiver too. Deebo Samuel, right? I thought last year I was out on Deebo. I was wrong. He was a fade. I didn't think they would use him as much. I thought that the outlier campaign would be the campaign before they acquired CMC, and then he wouldn't get as much run on the ground or through or just like red zone rushing attempts, right? He still got a little bit. It went down, but man, he was still just awesome. He's going to miss time. Unfortunately, he just seems to always miss time. He takes a lot of shots, but the offense is so efficient. He is just the engine, right? Him and Trent Williams, and now with Ayuk. So with the Ayuk stuff, I have moved Deebo up and Ayuk down. I like Ayuk. I kind of like him a little bit more to Deebo if he was more healthy. I think the ceiling is just a touch higher. He did lead the team in touchdowns and catches and yards, but he's not getting the same type of volume as the other wide receiver ones. It's like 75 catches led the team. So they spread the ball around. They run the ball. There's been some talk about throwing a little bit more with Purdy. But why would you with CMC? Maybe they decided to keep him a little bit fresher, scale him back just a touch. But I'm concerned about Ayuk because I think it's a headspace thing too, right? This guy he was ticked off immediately after they lost in the Super Bowl. He was even ticked off and they beat the Lions. I think he had like 3 catches, a couple targets, just wasn't happy. And he took to Instagram Live and want to play with his old buddy Jaden Daniels. So I haven't been in the camp where he's traded. I just don't think it makes sense for the Niners to trade him. They have Super Bowl aspirations. They've been in the Super Bowl twice over the last 4 years, so it doesn't make them any better. Like the time to trade him was at the draft, so they can get first round picks and get a wide receiver in the draft. They did get Ricky Pearsall, who's been hurt basically the entire camp. He is not the answer. Like if they were to trade Ayuk, like I just don't feel like they're trading to Pittsburgh, because what does Pittsburgh offer them to be better now? Like again, trading Ayuk is not good for their outlook. It's good for the Eagles and the Lions and the Packers in the NFC, but it's not good for their outlook. It's not great for Purdy. It's good for Debo and Kittle. It's not good for Purdy. And although I don't see them trading him. I could see some sort of scenario where he decides to sit out for a little bit, or there's some sort of hamstring issue or soft tissue issue from him just hanging out, right? CD now has 2 weeks to ramp up. Chase return to practice, got a couple weeks to ramp up. What's Ayuk doing? He's hanging out on the sidelines. You could live without Ayuk on your fantasy team. But one thing I will say, if he continues to fall and you get him as your wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4, I think that's a risk I'm willing to take, as opposed to him being my 1 or 2. I do believe, like I said, he's got high wide receiver 2 upside there. Guys on this list, Cooper Kupp, again, like there's some injuries, a little bit older. He looks healthy in camp. He has top 5 upside at the position. I think it's a 1A, 1B. And we have seen both Rams. We've seen Kupp and Woods. We've seen Brandon Cooks and Kupp. We've seen 2 Rams wide receivers finish inside the top 15 multiple times, right? So Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, both these guys eating. Nico Collins, right? You bring in Stephon Diggs, a little bit of crowded now. But he is the Texan that I do want. Among the leaders in yards per run, a really strong number. I think he's going to be the go-to guy for Stroud. I'm a little bit sour on Diggs and Tank Dell. As you see, they're not here inside the top 24. And both of these guys, certainly in best ball, wide receivers are pushed up. They're getting drafted much higher than I have them ranked. But Collins, if you've been hanging out with me, man, I was a year too early on Nico Collins. I liked him 2 years ago. I was pushing for him. Of course, it was Davis Mills. We had some shares in Nico, and Stroud was our most owned quarterback in best ball last year, but I just didn't think the performance I didn't think it was going to be that good. Big body, can go up and get it. Nice route runner. I think he's going to be Stroud's go-to guy there. DJ Moore, just like Collins, right? Crowded now. You had Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze. So I don't have a lot of shares of Collins and DJ Moore, but those are the 2 that I think will be the best in their respective offenses. But there's a lot going on there now. Dalton Schultz and Cole Kmet are almost undraftable because of the pieces that they brought in. But I believe in Caleb Williams, and I certainly believe in Stroud and both of those offenses being good. Metcalf, right? The highest ceiling in Seattle, touchdown machine. A little sour on Lockett like JSN, but crowded as well. Jalen Waddle, I considered maybe moving up into that. He's still in that Cooper Kupp, Collins, Moore, Metcalf range. This is a big tier for me. Devontae Smith and T. Higgins in that tier as well. Waddle, Smith, and Higgins, those guys are, you can group them together because they're like, I don't know if they're 1B, but they're like the solid 2, right? Waddle with Tyreek and Smith with AJ and Higgins with Chase, linked to good quarterbacks and good offenses. And the 3s are kind of not around, right? Who's the 3 in Philly? Who's the 3 in Miami? I like Malik Washington. Jonnu Smith is there now. Who's the 3 in Cincy? Boyd actually led all wide receivers in Cincy in third down catches. I like Yossi Vosh, but let's be honest, he's just young. They bring in Mike Gesicki. So those are guys that I feel like Waddle's certainly getting the respect to see him as high as wide receiver 13 in best ball. So again, maybe I should have him a touch higher. I like him as a target. I like Devontae Smith as a target, and I really like T. Higgins, and I'm shocked that he's going as wide receiver 28 and 30. He's had 2 top 15 performances on his resume already, year 2 and year 3. Last year, outlier. He was hurt. Burrow was hurt, right? And he finished strong last year with Jake Browning. The offense should be the same, even though Brian Callahan has gone back to Jay Morrison. He said that they're going to run a little bit more 12 this year. But T. Higgins is the number 2 inside the offense. And as I said, you go back a couple of years ago, wide receiver 15 and I think 11 in fantasy points per game, 1,000-yard campaign, 70-plus catches. I like T. Higgins. I like a few of his futures over 4.5 touchdowns. To me, is an easy smash. I think he gets back into the 7 range. So I'm getting a lot of T. Higgins. I'm getting him as my wide receiver 3 and in the 4th round. at times. So I think he makes for a really good 3. And as you see, I have him as a 2. Pittman's the guy I'm a little bit sour on. He's the guy at 24 there. I just don't think he's going to get the same sort of volume last year. Use our splits tools when Gardner Minshew took over. It's a very small sample size with Anthony Richardson and Pittman. It was just the 4 games, but when Gardner Minshew took over, he really force fed the ball to Michael Pittman. I just don't think that's going to be the case this year. I like Shane Steichen. I think he's a hell of a play caller, terrific, one of the most underrated play callers in the NFL. They run up tempo very fast using our splits tools, the fastest in the NFL last year. I forget the number of seconds per snap, but it was quick. They're run first offense. They're a fun offense, up tempo, but run first. They didn't have A-Rich and Taylor together at the same time last year. Boxes will be stacked because the run first offense. You got to worry about Taylor. You got to worry about A-Rich. Then you add Adonai Mitchell to the offense and Josh Downs eventually when he's healthy. You have 3 wide receivers, and Downs missed a little bit of time last year. So I just don't think Pittman's going to get the same type of volume. He's going as wide receiver 13, 14 in high 6 leagues. This is an easy fade for me. I understand that the target share was high during RPOs, but I'm telling you, I just don't think he's going to get the same type of volume. And I think A.D. Mitchell is a really nice value. They've been playing him in the slot with Downs hurt. He's going to see a lot of one-on-one. Rich is going to throw it up to him. He's going to be that deep threat guy in the offense. He's the guy that's going to score touchdowns. Pittman doesn't score a ton of those touchdowns, and they're going to run inside the red zone. So he's like the short intermediate type guy. Michael Pittman Downs in the slot when he's fully healthy, and the AD kind of out wide, playing the AJ Brown role in Steichen's offense from Philadelphia. I don't want to compare the two, but you can move them around a little bit, see some one-on-one, some deep threat stuff there. So I don't have a lot of shares of Michael Pittman. I've been a fan, though. I'm not a hater. Like, I remember people having debates between Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman. I never understood that. Like, I like Pittman as a player. It's just how I think the offense is going to run. So back to 2. Been as I hammer wide receivers, happy with Waddle and Devontae as my 2 and taking the value with T. Higgins and kind of bypassing Pittman and Neighbors. You get Kupp as your 2. I'm fine with it. Debo as your 2. I'm fine with it as well. Wide receiver 3s here. So still some dudes in this range that I like. I hammer wide receivers early and often. I keep saying it. So I have some shares of these guys, but I kind of have 3 of like my top 24, or I'm looking at a running back in this range, get my hero RB, whether it's soaking up the Kamara, Connor, Pacheco, Jacobs kind of range in there as well. Zamir White I like, but you can get a little bit later than this. So Stephon Diggs, again, just I don't think he's washed. I think that the Bills just changed their offense. It became more run heavy when Joe Brady took over, and that hurt Diggs. It's a good real life move for CJ Stroud and the Texans, but that ball is going to be spread out around. And I could see like Tank Dell kind of being the number 2 behind Diggs. I have Dell ranked pretty low just because I want to talk about. There's so much going on. Dell, I think, last year was very boomer bust, man. Dude scores touchdowns. He's explosive with the ball in his hands. And it was funny to talk about Stroud when he could pick any of his offensive weapons against Micah Parsons' podcast. It was really informing listening to those 2 guys, man. I loved every minute of it. And Stroud was picking his wide receivers, right? He had like Adams and Chase, and he picked Tank Dell. It's kind of a slot guy in there. And offensive lineman and stuff. So this is interesting to hear him talk up, Dell and view him that way. But anyways, guys that I like on this list, Terry McLaurin. I'll read it off for the iTunes listeners. I got Stephon Diggs at 24, Terry McLaurin at 20. Stephon Diggs at 25, Terry McLaurin 26, Amari Cooper at 27, Zay Flowers 28, George Pickens at 29, Rashee Rice at 30, Calvin Ridley at 31, Keenan Allen 32, Tank Dell at 33, Chris Godwin at 34, Christian Kirk at 35, Deontay Johnson at 36. So guys that I like, I'll start with Terry. He's in the 30s. Terry, every year, 1,000 yards, right? He's got 1,000 yards in 4 straight campaigns. Jaden Daniels will be quarterback 12 for him in Washington as he heads into year 6. Think about that for a minute. Crazy. It looks like they finally have a franchise quarterback. Dotson leaving doesn't make me like Terry anymore. And people saying it's not a good thing because he'll double coverage. It's not really the way that the defenses work. Yeah, of course, they'll be focusing on Terry. But I think it's going to be a run-first offense, short. Anything I've seen from preseason has been short ADOT, like 5.5 ADOT for Jaden Daniels, who does have a deep ball. I mean, we saw it from De'Ami Brown. We've seen it with LSU, and in Brian Thomas Jr. leading the nation in touchdowns, and Malik Neighbors on that squad as well. A lot of weapons there. I think he's got a good deep ball. I think like, again, the gap between him and Anthony Richardson maybe too large. I think he's a better decision maker and got a better ball, but the weapons and the play calling better in Indy. And we've seen a couple games, so that's part of it in terms of the ADP. But Terry, he usually finishes as a low end wide receiver too, right? With just piss poor play at the quarterback position, you can bank on 1,000 yards, 130 targets. I think Jaden Daniels can help him get into maybe low end wide receiver 2, or maybe get him into that 15, 17 range if he can just get 7 or 8 touchdowns. That's it. That's the difference from finishing as a wide receiver 3 to mid 2, is scoring some touchdowns, right? He's had 4 or 5 basically every year. So an improvement at the quarterback position. I actually think Cliff Kingsbury is probably better suited as a play caller than a head coach. So he should get all the volume that he can handle. Amari Cooper, I have no issues with him. I don't think it's going to be as pass happy in Cleveland as it was last year when Watson went down and Nick Chubb. They were number 1 in pass percentage with Joe Flacco. They did add Jerry Jeudy, got Elijah Moore outside. I think everybody's kind of suited now. Jeudy in the slot, Njoku there. So there's a lot going on, but Cooper is one of those guys that just seems to get disrespected every year. Zay Flowers, I like. The one will be Andrews, should he stay healthy, and I think they're going to find a way to get Isaiah Likely more touches, maybe run some more 12 or just line him out wide. But Flowers, I like a little bit more than most, 1,000 yards. They're going to run first offense, we know, but there's not a lot of other wide receivers in that squad that I respect. George Pickens and Ayuk, these guys have both fallen down drafts over the last month because of the trade rumors. So Pickens, I mean, if Ayuk went to Pittsburgh, it would hurt his stock. It would hurt George Pickens' stock as well. But if nothing happens, then you got a discount in Ayuk really for the past month, and you've had a discount in George Pickens. I've been taking him as my 3. I've been shying away from him lately just in case there was a trade. I don't think that there will be, but just in case. But Pickens, I mean, he's very talented. He's not going to be a target hog. I think there is better play at the quarterback position, whether it's Russ or Fields, most likely Russ. I'm sure we're going to see Fields and 3 different quarterbacks last year. And you can see his game take off at the end of last season when they had Mason Rudolph, who's he was a better passer than Pickens and Trubisky. So he's the guy there, right? There's nothing else there. And Pittsburgh needs another wide receiver because the defense is legit. They need another wide receiver there. I'm surprised, Wilson's hurt already. Pickens, I'm seeing Arthur Smith roll out Washington. I think Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, I think he'll be serviceable as like a low end tight end 1, but Van Jefferson as the 2 is not the answer. Austin's not the answer. But big play guy, right? Boomer bust. Last year led the NFL in yards per catch. You know who's number 2? Brendan Ayuk. So it'd be funny to have both of those guys if they're on the same team. Rashee Rice, I don't think there's any suspension coming. His court date is in December. I don't know. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm not 100% sure, but the suspension could come next year. And I know there was some offseason stuff with Alvin Kamara one year, and the suspension didn't come until the following year. And I think Zeke dealt with the suspension maybe towards the end of a season. I'm not 100% sure on that. That one may have came early too. I think we were expecting his suspension, and then he played, and then it came. I think that's how it went. I don't think that's how it's going to go in KC. If they didn't acquire Hollywood Brown or draft Xavier Worthy, I would have Rashee Rice inside my top 24. A lot of screen passes last year. I think just having some explosiveness with Worthy and Hollywood will help Patrick Mahomes and certainly help Travis Kelce. But Rashee Rice, people were afraid to draft him a couple months ago, and you're getting was like wide receiver 40. So there is a little bit of risk there, but if he falls down draft boards, you can get him as your 3. I think it's solid. Ridley and Allen join kind of crowded wide receiver rooms. Hopkins has fallen because of the injury, but Ridley hasn't jumped up, which I do think is a little weird. He led the NFL in end zone targets last year. As you guys heard with the quarterbacks, I'm big on Will Levis and the Titans this year. This is big on Brian Callahan. I mean, Will Levis had a heck of a preseason, and I know it was just preseason, but I think he was 11 for 13. He had a rushing touchdown, the highest QB rating, and he's just a lot of RPOs and screen passes. But I think list like Ridley and Hopkins and Boyd is good for Will Levis, where it just could be a little frustrating to own some of these guys in fantasy, and that's why I feel the same way about Tank Dell. Godwin, I thought it would have higher, but my projections kind of spit him out here. I think he's a good value. He's back in the slot where he's had most of his success. He hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns lately. A little bit unlucky because he had the same amount of red zone targets as Mike Evans, but Evans is a big body who can come up and get it. But Chris Godwin, I think, is a good target. I think he's got a decent floor. I believe he was 18th at the wide receiver position in targets. He should, continue to get a big bulk of them. There's not a lot else out there. McMillan, just a young buck, should be the three-headed Palmer. Kate Otten runs all kinds of routes, but he doesn't get a lot of run. He did have some moments last year, certainly in matchups where you can exploit the middle of the field, which happened to be against the Eagles in that playoff game. They struggled against tight ends all year long, and he had a big playoff game there. But I'm not, the ceiling isn't super high, but I think he's a good pick. Honestly, he just keeps falling, and I've been taking him sometimes as my wide receiver 4. That's how much I like wide receivers. Christian Kirk in there. I mean, I think he's fine. He's dealing with an injury right now. I'm more interested in Brian Thomas Jr. as a touchdown guy, but you add in Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram, who is a target hog there. But I do think we're going to see a bounce back from Trevor Lawrence and the Jags offense. And Deontay Johnson in there, he really should be a target hog in Carolina, right? I think Bryce Young is set up to have a little bit more success, bringing in Dave Canales. They certainly needed some guys on defense and other guys, but they drafted some skill position players to help out their franchise quarterback. Jonathan Brooks not going to be good to go for the few weeks, but Javian Sanders, Xavier Legette has been in and out of practices because of an injury. Adam Thielen was the only guy who could separate last year, but he's a lot older. Deontay Johnson has taken a couple step backs in terms of separation, but he's still one of the better wide receivers at separating, so that will help. Bryce Young, these guys reportedly having breakfasts and lunches together. I don't think that's going to result in the same as it did for Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford a few years ago. But Deontay, I could see him being inside the top 10, top 15 in overall targets. But again, the volume, how great are those targets going to be? Bryce Young had issues pushing the ball down the field last year. And I think Deontay Johnson has 5 touchdowns in the last 30 some odd games. So the ceiling is capped. I think Carolina is going to be one of the worst football teams in the NFL. But having said all of that, people are not willing to really draft him. The fantasy community sees the volume and they see the targets, but getting him as your wide receiver 4, I think is solid. I don't want him as my wide receiver 2, and I'm okay maybe as my 3, but it really 4 as just okay, there's some volume here, there's a floor, and then it will allow you to take some high upside wide receivers that you'll see on this list, and I'll get into a couple others. So there's a lot of high and some boomer bust guys here, and I think the way you can construct your roster, you can get some of these guys as your 4. So at 37 here, DeAndre Hopkins, Cortland Sutton at 38, Ladd McConkey 39, Brian Thomas Jr. 40, Hollywood Brown at 41. Would be a little higher, but he's going to miss the first couple weeks. Plus, he has had some injuries over the past couple years. Roma Dunze at 42, Jackson Smith at Jigba at 43, Jaden Reed 44, Jameson Williams 45, Xavier Worthy at 46, Keon Coleman at 47, Romeo Doubs at 48. So I'm a little bit higher than most on Sutton. I actually don't mind Bo Nix. I mean, he's got 60 some odd games of experience, 70% completion rate over the last 2 years at Oregon. I think he's Russ may be better for his game because of the touchdowns, but Bo Nix is a pretty accurate quarterback. There's a lot of question marks after Cortland Sutton. He's not a sexy pick. I actually don't have a lot of shares of him, but I can see him finishing as a top 40 wide receiver. And the shares that I do have is because he falls into the mid 40s. And I'm okay, maybe he's my 4, right? Don't really want him as my 2 or my 3. Any of these guys I don't want as my 2 or my 3, but Ladd McConkey and Brian Thomas Jr. I have a lot of shares of these guys as my 4 and my 5. Roma Dunze going a lot earlier than this. I think that there's a real possibility that he could be the number 2 behind Keenan because he's a lot older, but I do believe reports in Chicago that Keenan's going to be very much involved in this offense as the veteran in the slot, and you could see what he did with Justin Herbert in the first few years of his career. Roma Dunze is going to score a lot of touchdowns in the NFL with Caleb Williams, right? Again, talent-wise, I think he's right there on the same tier with Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison, but there's a lot going on there, a lot. Swift catching balls in the backfield. You got Cole Kmet, you got Gerald Everett there, who's familiar with Shane Waldron. They spent a year together in Seattle. He's a guy that can get on the field in third down situations. There's just a lot going on. So Roma Dunze is a fade for me in redraft. I could be on the wrong side of it. It worked out for me last year. I faded JSN. It was the same sort of deal. JSN joins a room with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and he's still there. But I think Lockett this year will take the step back. Started to see it last year, despite leading the Seahawks in targets. JSN last year was tied for the target lead in the last 5 games. 2 of his 4 touchdowns came in the last final games, and they were walk-off touchdowns. I think they were game-winning touchdowns anyways in the final minute or 2. And I think JSN is ready to take that step forward. I think, Keenan may not be on the team next year, and Roma Dunze is a guy that we're talking about differently here. If he falls in your rookie-only draft, or you can buy low on him, if he struggles in year 1, do it. But there's a lot going on there at the moment. But, man, we've already seen a couple of nice plays from Dunze and Caleb Williams. So Ladd McConkey, right? I like everything about Ladd, man. I like his footwork. I like the route running ability. I like his hands. He's great after the catch. I like the fact that Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Gerald Everett and Austin Eckler are gone. I also like the value in Joshua Palmer. After that, right, Quentin Johnson, I got concerns. Brendan Rice, maybe better than Quentin Johnson this year, but I don't think either of those guys are going to be fantasy relevant. DJ Chark already dealing with an injury as a deep threat guy. I do have some best ball shares of him, but I think that they're going to run the football a lot with Harbaugh and Roman. Roman brings over his 2 Ravens guys that he's familiar with, and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. They're actually keeping 4 running backs on the roster in LA. So they're going to run the football quite a bit there this season. And then also, Herbert may run, although he does have the plantar fasciitis. He'll probably have to deal with that all year long. But ultimately, I do think this is going to be a run for his team. But I like Ladd McConkey and Palmer, because somebody's going to have to catch passes. Like Herbert's going to sling it, and he's going to chuck the football at times. My goodness. He's too good to turn it around and hand it off 40 times. But Ladd, I like a little bit more than most. Again, I think it's important to get him as like the 4 or the 5. Same with Brian Thomas Jr. I mentioned leading the nation in touchdowns last year. People talk about his route running tree being limited, but they didn't ask him to run a lot of these routes at LSU when they had Malik Neighbors. It just didn't. So Brian Thomas Jr. can do a lot. It may take some time. They did bring in Gabe Davis, who is very boomer bust. I think 8 games with 5 or fewer fantasy points, but he will help out Trevor Lawrence. He is a touchdown guy, end zone targets. He could get another 7 this year. But Brian Thomas Jr., I really like. I think the ceiling is high, and he's been impressive in the small sample size. Trevor Lawrence looked really good in the preseason. Like I said earlier, I think a bounce back for him. So Ladd and Thomas are going a little bit later. Try to get them as my 4 or my 5. 4 kind of better suited. And again, you could take some risks on a Brian Thomas Jr. or Ladd McConkey or a Jameson Williams, who I have higher than most, is like boom or bust, especially I think with Brian Thomas and Jameson Williams. High A-dot touchdowns are going to be their explosive games. Jameson could have a like Deshaun Jackson type career where it's like 50 catches, but over 1,000 yards and like 40 plus touchdowns. That's what he did at Bama. And you could start to see it towards the end of last season, the breakout. And, Josh Reynolds is gone. Say what you want about Reynolds, but he was getting some red zone targets. He's just gone. See you later. In the NFC Conference Championship game, we saw Jameson Williams with receiving touchdown and a rushing touchdown. Of course, he's like the 4th option, right? Because you have Gibbs catching balls out of the backfield, and you have Amon-Ra and Laporta, who had double-digit touchdowns as well. But, Goff in the dome 14 times, the deep threat guy, the attention on the ground game, and some of these other guys. I think Jameson Williams, listen, this is first-round talent that, in year 1, the knee injury, so wasn't activated till week 13. Season's already over. How involved is he going to be in the final few games? He wasn't at all. I think he caught 1 pass. And then year 2, missed the first 6 games, suspension. So here it is, year 3, running with the first team, which just wasn't the case over the past couple of years, healthy at the moment. Of course, he's getting talked up by the training staff and Goff, because you just watch him and he's balling out in practice. A dude scored a touchdown while throwing up in practice. I don't know if you guys heard that. There was like early on in training camp, he scored a touchdown, threw up like mid stride, hung onto the ball, went down on the ground, wiped his face, and went back to the huddle. I liked hearing it. Jared Goff liked hearing it. He's a baller, man. I like JMO. So other guys in this range, I have a little bit lower on Jaden Reed. If you remember last year, Reed was my I was in on Christian Watson too. I'll take that L. No problem taking that L, but I was in on Love and I was in on Reed late, and certainly they returned value. Loved having those guys. I like Jaden Reed, but man, I can't take him as wide receiver 36. Like, you still have Watson, you have Romeo Doubs, you have Wicks, you have 2 tight ends, you added Josh Jacobs. This is a lot going on there that I think the ball will be spread out, right? Just draft Jordan Love. That's why I have a lot of shares in Jordan Love. right? He's going to spread this thing out to different guys. I think Reed may be the most consistent, just the fact that they can use him in different ways, end around carries. He could be on the field, kind of Debo like, in a like wide receiver 2 sets and things like that. I think he's the guy. I'm not going to completely cross off Christian or Watson, but I'm not going to rank him aggressively again because he hasn't shown me that he can stay healthy, and that's it. He could learn different running techniques all he wants. The hamstring's been an issue. Soft tissue injuries have been an issue. So you look at the Packers wide receivers. I mean, they're pretty tight. Reed's the first one. I think he's roughly wide receiver 36. I'm looking at that right now. Wide receiver 40 for Watson, wide receiver 51 for Doubs, wide receiver 54 for Wicks. So I think maybe the best route runner of the bunch, but pretty crowded, a lot going on. Love said Wicks going to have a monster season. If that's the case, Love has a monster season. I like Doubs probably the best because he's wide receiver 51. And he's on this list. I have him ranked higher than most, and I have Reed lower than most and Watson lower than most. Again, it's going to be tough to figure this thing out from a week-to-week standpoint. I think Reed and Doubs are the guys. You want to roll the dice on Watson again? By all means. I have a couple shares. I think makes a lot of sense in best ball. You hope that he stays healthy because he does have a lot of talent and skill as the deep threat guy inside this offense, and maybe somebody that Love can lean on in the red zone. But last year, Doubs was that guy. He was number one in target share. He was number one in air yard share, number one in end zone targets, red zone targets. He was tied for the lead in touchdowns. Look at the 2 playoff games. It was really just him. And it was a whole lot of Aaron Jones, but it was really Doubs. And that's very telling. So I think he's the better value in this wide receiver room. So I'm a little sour on some of the other guys. Xavier Worthy's just going too early. We played this game before with the Chiefs, have we not? CEH, pick 101, dynasty there to put him in the Hall of Fame. People put him in the Hall of Fame when the Chiefs drafted him. That's it. They did. They said Brian Westbrook. I heard it. He's linked to Reed. He's going to be Jamal Charles. He's going to be LaShawn McCoy. He's going to be Brian Westbrook. CEH is fighting for opportunities now a couple years later. Xavier Worthy's fast. He's the fastest man ever at the combine. I get it. He's linked to Mahomes and Andy Reid. Do you remember Kadarius Toney? Right? You remember when Kadarius Toney was traded there and the fantasy community just went nuts over this guy. League winner. Go get him in Dynasty. That was a mistake. Dude got cut today. Not even on the Chiefs roster. I think Worthy's better than Toney. You know, he brings an added element that they didn't have last year. I talked about the explosiveness, making Travis Kelce's life a little bit easier. It's not just going to be screen passes, harder to blanket and double Kelce. But when everybody's healthy and Hollywood is healthy too, like I could see him, being a better asset than Xavier Worthy in fantasy. And some of these Chiefs wide receivers haven't really been all that great apart from Rice. And I know that they cut a lot of the guys that dropped a bunch of passes for them last year. I think this is better for Mahomes. Just too early. He's just going too early for me in redraft. He's going as wide receiver 36, guys. So it's just way too early for me. I'm not comfortable with him as my wide receiver 2 or 3. I could get behind maybe 4, right? With JMO, Brian Thomas, right? The way that you can construct your roster is hammering wide receiver, maybe with your first 3 picks or 2 of your first 3 or 3 of your first 4, taking some floor guys, high-end guys, and then you can take some shots on some of these rookies or that'll be inconsistent, like a Brian Thomas or a Ladd or a Dunze or Worthy or Keon Coleman or like Jameson Williams, who I expect to break out from. You can get by with those being your 4s or your 5s. I know that some leagues only start 3 or 4, but if you can start 5, you got a couple flex with the 3, then boom, giddy up. Get a couple of these guys, but make sure they're your 4s. Maybe 3s, but 4s and 5s in particular, and away you go. So those are the top 48. I like wide receivers early and often. I've said that multiple times. Some other guys that didn't make the cut that I'd like to throw out for you guys. I also like Shakir. He's at 49. I like Keon Coleman. I think there's more upside for touchdowns. There's like 80% of the end zone targets and roughly 2,000 yards gone from, Josh Allen's offense with Davis and Diggs gone. But it is going to be a run-first offense. Allen, of course, is still capable of tossing a couple touchdowns. I think Curtis Samuel is probably the guy that's on the field a lot. His best season was with Joe Brady in Carolina, but I just don't see the ceiling for him. Maybe some rushing end arounds, but he's not going to score a lot of touchdowns. I like Keon Coleman. I like them both. Shakir and Coleman. I have more shares of Coleman, but I try to get one of the two because I think that they're pretty good values and they're linked to a good quarterback. And hey, man, there's some opportunities for targets. Kincaid's my favorite Bill to draft, though. I think he's going to lead the team in receptions and targets. Lockett, no. Watson, not so much. Addison, no. Palmer, I think, is a good value. I think even Jacoby Myers is a good value. Actually finished in fantasy points per game as a top 25 wide receiver, if you can believe that. And again, better play at the quarterback position. Mike Williams is in this range for me. He's practicing. He's going to miss the first couple weeks. He's, of course, very boomer bust and injury concern. But again, you get him as your fifth wide receiver. When he's healthy and active and Rodgers is healthy, I'll be ranking him as a top 35 wide receiver because we've seen it, right? He can be a touchdown guy. He's the number two. I think they'll run quite a bit with Breece Hall, but he's a guy that could be a wide receiver 3 or a flex, right? And it's not costing you a whole lot. Again, the way that you can build your roster. Don't draft these guys, boomer bust or injury guys, as your 3 or your 4 and banking on playing them. You bank on them returning value and then, get into bye weeks and injuries happen or trade pieces for you. That's how you construct your rosters. A couple other guys I'll toss out here that I like. Rashid Shaheed, I don't mind taking a dart throw on him. Darnell Mooney, just a couple years removed from 1,000 yards, right? Nothing really for him at the quarterback position over the past couple of years. I view Darnell Mooney as like the Jordan Addison in the offense, right? I like the play calling. Check comes from Sean McVay. Giddy up. Attention on London and Pitts, a deep threat guy. The busted coverage, right? We saw that last year. Jordan Addison had 10 touchdowns. I think a majority of them early on were coming busted coverage, right? Safeties coming in, focusing on other guys, and then just one-on-one over the top. Mooney can be that guy. I have a lot of shares of Mooney, actually. Certainly in best ball formats. I like Jalen Polk. Right, I understand that the quarterback play is going to be bad. We'll see May. We'll see Brissett. It's yet to be known who the quarterback will be week 1. I think Brissett, but May has been better than Brissett in the preseason. And the wide receiver room is fairly deep or fairly weak, right? Demario Douglas in there, I think, is an okay target late. KJ Osborne's there. Tyquan Thornton, right? This has got a bunch of dudes. Polk, much more ahead of Javon Baker, who's a rookie. And I just think once we see May, like we will see Polk be the go-to guy, the deep threat guy. And you know what? He's got a nice deep ball. Drake May. So I have some shares of Jalen Polk and I've been taking him late, but I have him higher than most, but in the 60s, you can afford to take him with your last pick. I was going to talk Tim Patrick, but Denver Post saying that he may be cut or traded. I've been a sucker for Patrick over the past couple of years. He hasn't been healthy, but I thought he had a pretty good preseason with Bo Nix. I think he had a couple touchdowns there. So we'll see what team he lands on. Maybe it's Washington, maybe it's Pittsburgh, but I think he's an interesting pick late. Aiden Mitchell, I already talked about, pick late. Adam Thielen, it could be late, but I just don't think that there's a ceiling. Maybe in the deepest of like guillotine leagues or something, you can roll him out in the first couple weeks. Demarcus Robinson, I like Demarcus Robinson. He wasn't getting a lot of run in preseason, which I think is good for Demarcus Robinson. We were seeing Winnington get a little bit of run, and he was a preseason star. But I think that was really good news for Demarcus Robinson, right? Jordan Winnington, I would have ahead of Tutu Atwell. He kind of is like the next man up should something happen to Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua. I think Demarcus Robinson's earned himself a role in some 3 wide receiver sets. Certainly they like to run 3 wide in LA with McVay. So I think Robinson, deep league, right? Last round pick, best ball stuff. I'll throw Wan'Dale Robinson in there, Tyler Boyd in there, Andre Yosivas in there, Michael Wilson over Greg Dortch. I think these guys could be dart throws for you at the very end. Chark, Malachi Corley, Malik Washington in Miami. OBJ is not going to touch the field a lot this year, guys. I think Malik Washington fits in nicely. Not going to be consistent where I think you're starting him, but should something happen to Tyreek or Waddle, I think, a late round pick in best ball. I mentioned Roman Wilson earlier. But yeah, I do believe Yosivas over Burton. Burton's got work to do. He's not going to get on the field unless Chase or Higgins goes down. Yosivas is going to fill the Tyler Boyd role. Now, Boyd hasn't been fantasy relevant, but it's a good real life thing, I think, for Burrow, and maybe in deep league. I think I certainly have him ranked a lot higher than Jermaine Burton. The Washington guys on the way out, I think I hit on all the kind of Jalen McMillan, deep stuff. Out on Quentin Johnson. Out on Marvin Mims, just a rotational guy. Corley is okay, short A dot stuff. DJ Chark. I'll hit on the Washington guys here on the way out. Luke McCaffrey and Diami Brown. Diami Brown, I think, probably over Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey is a converted quarterback here, wide receiver. I think over time we could see him take that slot role, but not right now. Right? There's some time. I know he's the brother of Christian, the son of Ed, pedigree, bloodline, all that stuff. I think that there is going to be a role for him in the slot, but I think early on it's going to be Terry, Eckler, and Ertz, and maybe the deep threat to Diami Brown, which we saw in the preseason game. Even Crowder, man, like Crowder and Ertz going to get run early on, but can these guys hold up? And then we see Bensonot in there. They could just take some time. I think Ertz is going to play ahead of him. I think they're interesting dart throws at the very end, right? I just don't think that this offense is going to give you too much outside of McLaurin and Eckler. I'm interested in Eckler because of the way that they're running their offense, short A dot stuff, screen passes, quick passes, get the ball out quick, and of course Daniel's going to run. So I'm not crazy about McCaffrey or Diami Brown, but those are winners since Dotson was gone. Like if I had Dotson, I drafted a month ago, I'd just drop him, for some of the guys that I just talked about at the end of this show. Maybe even like one of those Washington guys. Like I just wouldn't hold Dotson. I would flip him for Diami Brown, or I would flip him for even Luke McCaffrey. But not surprised to hear that McCaffrey is kind of like, he's not locked into the slot role, right? Guy was playing quarterback a couple years ago, but I think that there is an opportunity for him this year. Wow, really long, 56 minutes. Can't believe it. The longest I'd like to ramble. If you guys hung out with me the whole time, I love you for it. We'll do tight ends next. We'll get into futures and bold predictions, and we'll start doing some live shows. We'll do a couple more live drafts here on our YouTube page, so make sure you're subscribed. You guys hang out with me, and we'll talk draft strategy. And if you have any keeper league questions, at Chris Meaney, at FTN Fantasy, Mean Streets, FTN at gmail.com. But the DMs are open. Slide on in, leave a comment in the comment section, and I will hang out and do some live drafts if you guys are waiting it out for like the last minute for some of your drafts. And I'll have a couple on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So if you had any questions at all, you guys can hit me up there as well. So good luck with the drafts. It's been fun to talk football again with you guys, and promo code FTN15. Save yourself a little bit of cash. Wide receiver early and often. We'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.